At least 2 dead and dozens hospitalized. Protesters in Georgia have found out the hard way why they shouldn't speak out against their leadership. Police showed little restraint in a crackdown on crowds who turn out for what's been called Georgia's Day of Rage, demanding that President Saakashvili resign. Sarah Firth is gauging the mood in Tbilisi for RT.
Well, certainly subdued here this morning after the scenes of violence that we saw break out last night as the police violently dispersed that crowd of protesters. Extremely quick for the police to break up that crowd. We saw a lot of arrests being made, even after the crowd had been removed from the main area. They were still pulling people out, bleeding from some of the buildings in handcuffs. There were a lot of old people carrying some quite significant injuries that we saw. So really very shocking indeed. We can show you a bit more now from those events because we were there at the scene as the violence unfolded. It was hailed by the opposition as the day that would determine Georgia's future. Instead, as the protests aimed at ousting President Saakashvili ended in violence and bloodshed. A huge force of riot police moved in on the crowd just minutes after midnight on Georgia's Day of Independence. It was thought the situation might escalate, and that certainly seems to be the case. Despite the heavy rain and thunderstorms, the crowd hasn't diminished. Now, at the moment, we've got police column down in the background here, and we've got one on the other side, so the demonstrators are surrounded. As the police closed in, water cannons were fired into the crowd. Rubber bullets and gas followed, seriously injuring both demonstrators and journalists. A police officer was killed when he was run over by a car, and a protester died in front of the Parliament building. The scenes of violence all the more shocking, given that many of those involved were of an older generation.
We were standing peacefully when riot police kicked me onto the ground and started beating me. My relatives also suffered. They smashed one of my friend's face and left another one unable to stand.
You can see from my face the kind of force they used, and I thank God I'm even alive. These people don't value human life.
It had been dubbed the Silver Revolution due to the older crowd. They'd turned out demonstrating against low pensions and rising food prices. For 5 days, they held vigil outside the main TV building in Tbilisi before taking their protest to the main parliament steps. Higher initial numbers of protesters at the weekend fell after disputes among the opposition parties themselves. But as they were led through the streets on Wednesday, the crowds once again turned out.
The police had to use force. Part of the demonstrators resisted violently.
Demonstrators were vastly outnumbered, and witnesses to the November 2007 protests, in which 600 were injured, say that this time round, police presence was even greater, and the force they used just as severe. Questions are already being asked about whether the scale of force used was justifiable. Many were arrested, and many more injured. The debris on the streets, the remnants of the violent clash. You can see they set up their main van from which the leaders of the opposition gave their speech. Nina Bajanazi, earlier on, just before the fighting broke out, was saying she would maybe be holding negotiations. That didn't happen. They wanted to out Saakashvili. Instead, the protest ending how it started in scenes of violence. Sarah Firth, RT.